Well, welcome to my stream. I was trying to start being on a regular schedule this week, and I'm off to a rousingly inaccurate start. I wanted to start about half an hour ago, uh, but I have kids. It can happen. Um, what I want to work on today, I only have about an hour, but it's kind of preparing for what I will be streaming on Thursday. So the story here is that um, I am. Actually, I should show a different picture in my in my stream. What I'm doing today is more related to this, and maybe even more related to this. Let's do that. Yeah. Today is more like an ikiwiki day. Uh, so I got to explain the whole stack here. What I want to work on is documentation for notqmail. Notqmail currently, as you may have noticed very quickly, redirects notqmail.org redirects to GitHub's wiki for the notqmail project, which has been fine, but I really would like to self-host the documentation for this project. Notqmail, if you haven't seen it before, is an open source email server derived from Qmail, which 20 years ago was still pretty cool, and one day with our efforts will be really cool again. And the documentation for it currently is a bunch of GitHub wiki pages which are Markdown, but I also have a copy of the source code, the source documentation, for Life with Qmail, which is a very lovingly made and maintained until it died on the vine like Qmail itself, documentation to support what the community that came up around Qmail when there was a big active one decided was the best shared wisdom for how to manage this software. And I have a copy of the whole source because Dave Sill likes the idea of notqmail, and short of getting involved, what he could do is give us a copy of this documentation so that we could bring it up to date with what notqmail is like and change it. So the trick is the source code, the source documentation for this, the format is not one that I have seen anywhere else. I actually don't totally recall what it is named. But I have the history in, I think, RCS, which I can convert to Git. And if I can get my preferred content management system to render this format, then we can keep the entire history, which is always enjoyable, and not have to translate the format, which is more pressingly important, and just work with it as is. We just need the ability for a content management system to render it, and then we need, this is where today's process comes in. That's not what I'm working on today, and not what I'm working on Thursday. What I'm working on is, if we had that format processed by ikiwiki, then we could self-host it. If, that is what I'm working on today, if ikiwiki also knew how to delegate authentication for web edits to GitHub, where we already have our contributors set up. So if you've ever seen on a website, like, log in with Twitter, log in with Facebook, log in with GitHub, that's what I want to implement as a plugin for ikiwiki, so that when we self-host, when we have the ability to process this format in ikiwiki, we can switch to ikiwiki. We can move our stuff from the GitHub wiki into our own self-hosted Markdown, and the stuff that isn't Markdown, which is this, can be there too, and it doesn't have to affect anybody much because they'll still click edit, they'll still log into GitHub if they didn't already, and they will still be editing in the browser and saving. So the part I want to work on today is the authentication piece, which I got some advice from people that I'm going to pair with on Thursday. And I want to pull up, because I looked into this before and I did not understand. This seems like GitHub has multiple kinds of authentication you can do, depending on what kind of application you're making. And all I want is something free that I could ideally upstream into an open source project, and that would then be easy for an instance admin, somebody using that software that runs the site, to turn it on if they want. If they need to make an API key with GitHub, that I guess that's fair. But ideally, would just super easily be able to turn this on their site when they want it. So I'm going to find those notes. Basically, GitHub is an authentication provider. I think this is the page I'm looking for. Let's see if that can pop up on my screen. Yeah. And then secondarily, this starting point. Yeah. So that's what's happening right now, is that I want to understand what I'm going to need to do in ikiwiki. Now on Thursday, between the two of us, or maybe three of us, we will have enough information to know how to do this, because Ted, Jitter Ted, has implemented OAuth for GitHub in one of his applications before. And so he knows this end of it. That's the person who gave me the advice. And then I know the other end of it, which is in ikiwiki writing a plugin that does authentication. So between the two of us, we should have enough information to make good progress on Thursday. Now, having written a bunch of ikiwiki plugins before, let me show you what ikiwiki is about. It's a mostly static site generator, mostly static. And this is before that terminology existed, so it calls itself a wiki compiler. This is one of the very first static site generators. It's not only static, it also has an optional CGI for self-hosted search on the server side, which I quite like, and for web editing, like a wiki, and a couple other things, but those are the main two, search and editing. Commenting also, you can have web comments, and that's another way to do it. So ikiwiki, I love it. I host all my sites on it whenever possible. My personal site, my business site, my podcast site. Anything that, that's my default choice. If something doesn't fit, then I'll host it with something else. But I much prefer ikiwiki. And then in terms of notqmail, having a wiki already, it's an easy migration path. I'm already hosting notqmail.org. I already have ikiwiki and a bunch of sites. For the people who will be editing, if I provide GitHub authentication to ikiwiki, it's an easy migration path for them too. The content will be the same. It'll be in the same text format. Wikis are wikis, So that's why I want to go there. And then in terms of plugins for ikiwiki, authentication is one type. I've done it before. I wrote one that I didn't really publish that lets you authenticate against the local Unix password database. There are some reasons why that's not a great idea to do on a production site, which is why I didn't really publish it, but it was handy for me in a limited situation many years ago. And then I've also, can't remember what they are right now. I've implemented other authentication plugins too. So that part I understand pretty well. And so, as you might guess, I don't think I'm going to need to write any OAuth code. for the protocol, whatever it is, myself, I imagine Perl being a great example of this, that there's a library that somebody has made that does that. That's one of the things Perl was famous for, even a long time ago, is that there's a library for everything in the CPAN, Comprehensive Perl Archive Network. So I don't think I'm going to have to write OAuth code. I think I have to find an OAuth library. Or maybe if I'm lucky, someone will have actually wrapped an OAuth library with the GitHub specific stuff that I need to know. And then I could only know about that. But either way, I'm not going to be writing original code about that. I'm going to be writing glue code that maps whatever OAuth needs to do onto ikiwiki's authentication hooks. And when that works, then I'm mostly done. I do need one more step. So for the notqmail wiki, as it currently stands, my understanding is that not everybody on GitHub can edit this. Only people who are members of the notqmail GitHub organization, or at least the project, can edit this. And I would want to preserve that property for a self-hosted version. And so, I don't know, the simplest version of that, this brings up the point that authentication is not the same as authorization. People sometimes say auth, but I like to disambiguate which one I'm talking about when. Authentication is who do you claim to be, and do we agree with that? And authorization is typically done after authentication. Now that we have our own opinion about who you are you allowed to do the thing that you're about to do? And so for authorization, the very simplest thing I might do is have a whitelist, an allow list, that I just locally maintain on the self-hosting server with the contents sort of manually synced to the GitHub organization or project. And that would work. And I might even do that as a first pass. But I imagine that in the GitHub API or APIs somewhere is a way to enumerate the members of that organization, or better yet, to give a GitHub ID and an organization and have GitHub tell me if it's a member or not. I don't actually need to keep a copy of that list if I don't have to. But so that's going to be an important step too. Before we switch the wikis, we need authentication to work, but we also need authorization to work. So one thing at a time. Let's look at what OAuth is trying to tell me. Okay, yeah, this is, so Ted said this is kind of the overview, and this is specifically what I'm interested in, and I think he's right. A very helpful guy. Going to be good to stream with him. So this is, yeah, this is where I got confused before. I don't know if I'm building a GitHub app. I don't know if a plugin for my content management system is a GitHub app, and I couldn't figure that out last time. I'm going to take Ted's word for it because he solved this problem recently himself. So that would still use OAuth, and that would be different, but I'm not going to do that. The web application flow to authorize users for your app is that users are redirected to request their GitHub identity. Then GitHub does the authentication in their browser, in their service. And then the user is redirected back, presumably with a success, or otherwise maybe not redirected back, I don't know. And then that comes with an access token for that user, for this, presumably for this session. And then we use that token to access the GitHub API. That last part wrinkled my forehead a little bit because I don't think there's any more API I need to access. after I have authenticated successfully with GitHub. Other than maybe like give me the group membership of the organization or the project. Give me a yes or no to that question. I guess I do need to call that API. Okay, so maybe that's not the wrong thing. My gain is too high today, isn't it? Yeah, so request an identity. Hit that get. Okay, so registered. I guess any instance admin hosting an ikiwiki where they want to turn on GitHub authentication for web editing will have to get a client ID. We'll have to register their site with GitHub and get a client ID. I guess that's fine. That's something that I'll have to document when I get it working, that's a step. Redirect URI is after GitHub authenticates you, where do they send you back to? So that'll be built up from wherever the ikiwiki CGI is, and that's configurable by the admin. So we'll just make the API call to know where that is and tack onto that. You can suggest a particular account for signing in. That's not going to apply for me. Scope. This sounds like an OAuth concept with scope. I'm not going to have any. There's either you can edit or you can't. So if I don't have to have a scope, I won't. And if I do, it'll be a global scope. Unless I learn something about OAuth, which I'm trying to avoid. Okay, and then I have to have some kind of an unguessable random string to protect against cross-site request forgery. And sign up. Yeah, my initial thought about that is no. If you're signing up for GitHub so that you can edit the wiki, then you're not a member of our organization, and this is not how you'll start. But I got to rethink that. Maybe documentation is a good place to start. We'll see. So far, there are very few members of the organization or the project, and all of them have pretty full access. I think one of them specifically also has admin access the same way that I do. And a few of them are just there to observe and occasionally comment. And a few of them, actually participate in making and reviewing PRs. So someday we will have the happy problem that there are people who want to be involved in documentation, and that's it. And then we'll have to be able to distinguish, maybe, if it's such a large project, which things they have access to and which they don't, or not. Like, I'm involved in NetBSD, and I'm allowed to commit to the NetBSD source tree. I shouldn't go randomly committing to it, but the social norms are enough, and the ability to roll back history is enough. So maybe this just will never matter. My point, though, is my intention is that I do want to have a welcoming project, and often making fixes to documentation is an easy place to start. And so I want to make sure the door is open for that. I don't think that this GitHub login token is going to be the gating factor to whether it feels like a welcoming community or not. Okay. So if the user accepts your request, GitHub redirects back to your site, temporary code, and my unguessable random string state. Temporary code lasts for 10 minutes. If the states don't match, something funny is going on. Don't do it. Then when you get the code, ask for an access token. And again, that's that client ID. Oh, and there's a client secret, so like an API key, basically. Okay, so there's a registration process. It has at least two things in it that every admin who wants to use this will have to do. The code that I just got, And again, that part of the CGI path where this will be the response. I will have some examples in ikiwiki to follow here. I don't think anybody has implemented OAuth 2 for ikiwiki yet, but we do have OpenID, which I gather is a very similar, at least for users, it's a very similar flow. You delegate authentication to an external provider, and then you get back a session token. So, this may be a little confusing because I don't know OAuth and I'm not trying to. I don't know OpenID either, but there's an example of something shaped similarly in ikiwiki that we can probably borrow from. And then we'll get a response with an access token and a scope, a repo gist, and a token type. You can get it back as JSON, you can get it back as XML. Okay, and once I have the token, then I guess I could do the authorization check. Yeah, this person is a GitHub user. Congratulations to them. Are they a notqmail wiki editor? Let's ask that. Headless app. I guess this isn't, because this is specifically web editing. This is a human initiated, human mediated process. So this is not a headless app. This is something with a UI and a person on the other end of it. I guess this isn't it. Because, so this is like a command line interface, it says. ikiwiki has one. ikiwiki is not only web editable, it is also Git editable. So if you don't like to edit in a web browser, have to think about how to handle that case too. The Git use case I'm familiar with is that your SSH key is placed on the server and you push to it over SSH transport. But then that would be duplicative with GitHub having people's SSH keys, and I would have to, like, anybody who wants to be able to get pushed to ikiwiki would have to give me their SSH keys explicitly. Again, not the end of the world, but if I'm able to avoid managing my own allow list, that's a copy of the GitHub organization structure, then I would like to also avoid copying for the same reason for a git push. So maybe there will be a command line flow, but I don't know who would be doing it. Yeah, maybe this is what that is. Like, you want your... So a person who's git pushing has the SSH private key material on their machine and only there. They have the public key, which makes the transport work on GitHub, which is why they can push to GitHub. Maybe there's an API where GitHub logged in as that user could give me the public keys that it has for them. Maybe. I'm not sure. Like maybe a user authenticated to GitHub is able to enumerate their own public keys that GitHub has, because you can see it on the website. If I'm logged into GitHub and I go to my page, profile, settings, whatever it is, my SSH public keys that I've given them are there. I can see them. So maybe that could work, and then maybe having fetched them, my plugin could place them. So like on your first web edit with your GitHub authentication to ikiwiki, maybe I could also fetch the SSH public keys and put them in the place that they would need to be, so that if you discover that you can git push to the wiki, then it'll work. I don't know. I like to git push to my wiki pretty often. It's one of the reasons I like ikiwiki. So that is important. And you can do it to GitHub wikis. I don't know if any of my collaborators are doing that, but it is a functionality that exists now. So it'd be really good to keep it as smooth as the web editing is. So maybe this is what device flow is about. Maybe I will need that for that functionality. And I guess that would be... No, I wouldn't. Because the web edit, if it can place the keys somewhere for the Git service, the client side doesn't have to care. Whenever they do a git push, it's the same SSH key, unless they have some very clever setup. So if they have that SSH key and they do a git push to the self-hosted site, provided the public key has already been placed there, maybe it'll ask them the first time to verify, but then it'll just work. So then, yeah, I'm going back to thinking that this isn't something that I will need, even for git push access, if I can help it. Okay. And what is the overview about? Yeah, let me see what's involved in registering. It said that you have to register, so let's see about that. Mm-hmm. So I guess, again, this is not ikiwiki itself that is being registered. This is anybody running an instance of ikiwiki, the name of their website, the location of that website, and based on their URL structure, the sort of the parameter to the ikiwiki CGI that this is going to bounce back to. Okay, so that's not hard to do, and it's easy enough to document. Pop on back. Scopes. I think it's time for me to learn about scopes. They limit access for auth tokens. Okay, so here's a distinction. A GitHub app uses many smaller GitHub-specific permissions. An OAuth scope is a generic thing that doesn't know about GitHub or any other site. And so I guess GitHub is saying, if you can, use our more granular permissions. Okay. Yeah, I don't find this super relevant, if I'm thinking correctly, because my self-hosted site isn't going to be doing any more GitHub things once you're logged in. That's just going to be doing ikiwiki things on the self-hosting server. So I don't think, like, what do I have to do to, like, be done satisfying the requirements for scope in OAuth 2? If your auth app doesn't have a browser, then you don't need to specify a scope. Available scope, none. So if I don't specify one, then it's going to say read only in the scope. Like, I don't have to honor that, but I would like to make my intent clear. Repo is probably better. It's read and write access. Repo status, unless there's one about documentation specifically. Because GitHub wikis are separate Git repos. Okay, so yeah, maybe just like a generic this is good enough to communicate the intent. Yeah. Right, so the request requests a scope, but also, of course, the authentication service will decide and tell you which ones you got. And users can further limit that. Okay, kind of getting a picture here. Let me try to remember what I did about authentication before, because I just cannot think of it. I guess I want to look at plugins. And then there's a tag cloud here, including auth. Okay, so Unix auth is that one I was talking about. I contributed to some minor details of HTTP auth. That one is not as relevant to flow. That's the kind of authentication when you go to a web page and the web server says unauthorized and the web browser pops up a dialog. That's HTTP auth. Most websites, and GitHub being one of them, do not use that mechanism. They use some other mechanism to provide a session. So that's what's going to happen. OpenID, I think, is the one that's most relevant here. So there's an OpenID client, and presumably there's something analogous in Perl. I have about 20 more minutes for this research, and then I have to get to my next meeting. But so we're going to need to find something analogous in Perl for an OAuth 2 client. And yeah, so OpenID has a scope. And it has a URL to bounce back to. And okay. So that's kind of equivalent. Let's pop into CPAN. I guess first things first, I would want to see what GitHub kinds of things I can do. Not that one. Maybe that one. Not that one. Crud. Yeah. I guess it could be interesting to see how that one authenticates, if it's the same. GitHub jobs, I don't know. GitHub email, no. GitHub score, GitHub backup. Import. Stance GitHub. It's a strange name, but reads like something that might be the thing. Ooh. What? That's related. Command line interface. Okay, I think these results are getting less good. Command line tools. What's the deal here? Yeah, doesn't look like anything. Perl interface for GitHub. Updated when? October. About a year ago. Not the end of the world, but not yesterday either. CRUD. need a personal access token. So this isn't going to show me what I want. What? Pod error. This is older and doesn't look so good. Never mind that. GitHub authorization. A non-web authorization token. Well, okay, but I am the web application flow, right? Isn't that what we saw? Yeah. So this is for the non-web application flow. Tokens that are independent of a user, I suppose. That is probably small and specific enough, though, to still be interesting. Let's take a quick look. So it's 5 years old, but what do we have? Probably not a lot to look at. Got GH token. Whoa, this got fancy. I didn't want to edit it. I'm just clicking around. User password scopes. 2-factor. Those are those arguments that for us I think are not optional, if I understood correctly. Verify SSL. And then return a de-JSONified token. All right. This isn't exactly what I want, but it is interesting. So, stars upon stars. Now this one looks like the whole API. What can be done with this? Username and a password? I don't think I'm going to be in a position to have that username and password. I don't want to be. I think that's the whole point. I'll have a button that says log in with GitHub. And I'll go that way, and they'll get the username and password. So what else can I do? Is there a different way? Suggested use OAuth. Okay. Not pictured. Exercise for the reader. What's this one here? Why? Oh, interesting. So there's something called PitHub. Good old Perl naming. Access token for non-web application. Huh. Okay, so then that little repo doesn't do much for me anymore. I'm gonna unstar it. Sorry. I'm sure it's good, but there's an example right there of the thing that I don't want. Well, how do I do what I want to do? What about PitHub? What's the story with this? That's updated pretty recently. So that's interesting. What's the difference here? Make a PitHub. Get some repos for the user. Okay, so the one we were looking at before, net GitHub supports all the versions of the GitHub API. PitHub only supports the most recent version. I don't have any idea why I would want to care about an old version, so that doesn't matter to me yet. Hopefully not at all. How do you authenticate? back to the top. User and token. Okay, so I don't know. I'm getting at a glance that the OAuth step is not pictured. You need to have done it and then use either this GitHub module or that GitHub module. Fine. I guess that's fine. In that case, I need to see how to do OAuth with Perl. And so for that, we will take another look at the CPAN. OAuth 2 is what I thought I was looking for. So here's one. Try another search without the 2. Yeah, see, this is what I thought I might be able to find is Facebook has OAuth, but I don't want to know about that. Google has OAuth, but I don't want to know about that. Maybe there is something like this. So search OAuth GitHub. Hey, what's this? Yeah, so this one, for example, Dancer is a web application framework. And maybe that would be a good piece of code to look at. How it delegates authentication. Got a few minutes left. Auth simple. I like simple. Looks old though. Wow. Okay. OAuth, NetAuth 2 is up for adoption. Does that mean it is not working? Issues? No. Can't tell from there. It only supports auth 2. Start with one of these. Okay. Hey, this is helpful. Is it up to date? Yeah, October last year. Reasonable. Web application flow is me, so they suggest to use this. Well, even though it's OAuth 1, I guess that's maybe fine. These are the things that we saw that we needed. So I won't have Dancer. I'll have use ikiwiki. NetAuth client. That's right. We're going to be a client. ID and secret. Site request token. This, yeah, okay. This looks pretty promising. Okay. I think I'm on the right track. I wish it was auth 2. Just because I know that 2 exists, and that's probably going to be needed. But maybe this is fine. Okay, so let's conclude for today. Again, what I will be streaming about with not just solo, but with Ted Young and possibly another guest on Thursday at my regularly scheduled time is trying to, in Perl, authenticate to GitHub with OAuth. And once we have that, then I want to integrate it into ikiwiki as an authentication plugin, so that when you go to web edit an ikiwiki site, if an admin has set it up that way, the login can take you to GitHub and back. And then when that has worked, then we want to do authorization, which hopefully we can also do by the GitHub API. we're going to work on that on Thursday. And I think I have enough information to start making a dent. So thanks for following along. We looked at notqmail to remember why we're doing this. That's the documentation that I'm trying to self-host so that I can add strangely formatted ancient documentation and bring it up to date. And I want to make those changes in ikiwiki. And I guess this is really kind of a holistic representation of all the things that I ever stream here. Because ikiwiki is one of them, notqmail is one of them, and whatever I figure out about ikiwiki, once I have it working, I will also apply a patch to package sources version of ikiwiki to add that feature. So that even if ikiwiki itself doesn't cut a new release soon, my own site, my own host, can have my own code running in production before that. And so this is going to tie together notqmail, whose documentation I'm trying to improve and self-host, ikiwiki, the site that's going to host it, the server software that's going to host it, and package source, which is how I'm going to manage that ikiwiki installation. So in a sense, this is really like ringing all the bells for this channel. So thanks for watching, and we're going to do some Perl programming on Thursday. See you then.